Good evening, Mr. Navarro.
Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Can I say something really quickly before we start?
Sure.
I'm in the middle of a remodeling project, and the plumber was supposed to be here at 2, then he was supposed to be here at 3. Then he said he's still coming, but he's gonna let me know when. So I guarantee it's gonna be in the middle of this meeting. So if my camera goes off really quickly, it's just for me to let him in and get my dog situated, and I'll be right back. So fingers crossed, that's what's gonna happen.
If he doesn't, we'll come over and help you.
Really?
We'll just wait another minute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
How did things go? Are you recovering?
I'm a little over 2 weeks into recovery. You may have seen me get up and walk away, so I can do that. But I got to work on flexibility. A lot of work.
Yes. You have a good physical therapist.
Well, it's Kaiser. You take your chances.
So I believe, Chair, we have everyone here.
Okay. Well, then, can we do the roll call? Is that the first? Let me pull up the agenda row. Oh, we start with the pledge. But the call to order, do we do the roll?
Let's go ahead and do the pledge, and then we'll do the roll call.
Okay. Alfred, would you be willing to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? You have to unmute yourself. We can't quite hear you.
You're muted.
Can you hear us?
Okay, how about now?
Yes.
All right.
Ready?
Little red, okay. I pledge allegiance
Against
to the
the
flag
flag.
For the
of the
United
United States of
States of
America,
America.
and to the republic for which we
which
stand,
stands
One
one
nation,
nation, indivisible, with liberty
and justice.
for all.
and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, now we should do the roll call.
Very good. Chair Harris,
Here?
Vice Chair Schmitz,
Here,
Task Force Member Chenoweth Moyer,
Here?
Task Force Member Duggan,
Here,
Task Force Member Moore,
Here.
Task Force Member Navarro,
Here,
and Task Force Member Wilcox.
Here.
All right, all members are present.
Okay, are there any additions, modifications, or deletions to the agenda? We really have just 2 items currently.
None from staff, Chair.
Okay. Any members have any changes?
no changes for me.
Okay. Then we'll move on to public comments. Did we receive some public comments?
We received one written public comment that I forwarded to the task force, and we do not have any hands raised at this time.
Okay. Did everyone get a chance to look at the public comments?
I did.
yes.
Okay.
Somebody sounding off as well.
Well, that's what
Okay.
public is for.
Right.
We like to
Next
see that.
I guess hopefully it's not too late for additions or deletions. Am I missing approval of the minutes from our last meeting?
That is item 5.1.
Ah, my mistake.
No worries.
The drugs haven't worn off yet.
Okay, next item is conflict disclosures. I'm not sure that we've done this before. And I'm not sure what disclosures are necessary beyond what,
There wouldn't be any, Chair,
Okay.
with respect to this task force and the items on the agenda.
okay, great. Just for future reference, the disclosures are regarding financial interests. Is that primarily?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. All right, then, let's move on to approval of the minutes for the Library Task Force regular meeting, which was held on Thursday, January 20th, 2022. Did everyone have, Task Force Member Schmitz?
Yes, I sent a proposed addition to the minutes to Carlo and Lynn. When I looked at section 5.3 of the minutes where we had our discussion, I have some draft language I propose to add to them, but I wanted to have a discussion amongst the task force members first. My recollection, and granted, things have happened since the last meeting, but when we had our discussion about the draft recommendations, we had a fairly lengthy discussion, and my recollection is that we wanted to get something into the city council quickly so that there would be a possibility of a budget item to fund the proposed study that we have in our draft recommendations. And personally, I would just feel more comfortable if we had some reference to that decision in our minutes. I know we kind of went round and round about how we were going to do this, but my suggestion was to add a sentence. If you're looking at the minutes, it would be the third sentence. So it says, after the presentation concluded, the task force engaged in a discussion about the draft recommendations. And then it moves right on to directing staff. And my suggestion for clarity is that a sentence be added that says, the task force reached consensus that there should be an initial recommendation to the city council in time for the fiscal year 2023 budget discussions to include funding for a consultant study on the library needs and obtaining community input on those needs and potential solutions. That's my suggestion, but I wanted to run it by the task force members to see if they felt the same way.
Well, I know there was some discussion, but my recollection isn't as that good. So I was wondering whether staff had a chance to review the recording and can verify that that was what we reached a consensus on.
Sure. So we did go back and review the video because there was, I agree with the vice chair, there were a lot of comments and back and forth on working on a motion to try to identify next steps. But what was voted on ultimately was very close to what's in the minutes here. They were represented as final recommendations to the council. And so I wanted to make sure what I have here in front of me after I've reviewed the video is very consistent with what's in the minutes presented before you. And what I believe the vice chair is referring to is some of the discussion that occurred before the motion. I will say there was some going back and forth on the approach, but the minutes seem to more accurately reflect the motion that was voted on by the task force.
And I guess my concern is that I don't think this initial recommendation that we're going to review here shortly is necessarily the complete recommendation to council. That at some point, once we have more information from the study, that we may modify, expand, refine our recommendations to the council. So the study isn't necessary for us to do a thorough job of recommending to council.
Any other members have comments?
Well, my recollection was that our discussion evolved around establishing a need or establishing the size for each library component to determine the square footage that would be required at the library in La Mesa prior to in order to enable someone to establish a budget for it. You cannot establish a budget unless you know the size of the children's area, the size of the auditorium for community meetings, the size of the reading area, the staff area, so on and so forth. And once you do that, you will have an idea of the size that is required here in La Mesa for a library. Therefore, you can establish a budget for it. Without that information, how can you establish a budget? You can't. I thought that was what we were talking about. And then
Well-
forwarding that to the council with a request for a study that would do those things.
Yes, and that is the next item on our agenda, is the recommendations that we propose to send forward to council regarding doing a feasibility study and needs assessment. So, but right now, we're talking about amending the minutes to include a sentence that would capture our discussion around forwarding the report to council in time for the funds to be budgeted. I think that's the gist of what Task Force Member Vice Chair Schmitz was saying, that we should add that in. Is that accurate?
That's a nice summary, yes.
Okay. Okay, well, if there's no objection, then I would propose that we go ahead and amend the minutes to say there was discussion about the necessity of timely getting a report and with our recommendations to council in a timely manner in order to get into the budget cycle.
So for clarification, what staff can do is we can go back a little bit in the discussion to capture the essence of that conversation as was described here, because I believe in general, what the vice chair is asking for is correct. It just wasn't the actual motion that was voted on, but we can capture the essence of that discussion in the minutes if that is the the task force's desire to do so.
Task Force Member Chenoweth Moyer, you're muted.
I'm in agreement with you. I think we should include that and maybe in this 5.3 section in reference to the discussion.
Okay. Well, I don't think this requires a vote. We're just going to have the minutes amended. And then should we wait till next meeting then to approve these minutes with that change?
Yeah, typically the meeting minutes are brought back when they're amended.
Okay,
At that time, I think that's when you would vote on the amending and approval.
okay. Thanks for that. So I did want to also note that the recordings of the meetings, I did have a member of the public ask me about whether the recording of the meeting could be posted within a couple weeks of the meeting so that it's available for the public to review. And I don't know, I checked last week and there was only the first meeting recording. So I just wanted to bring that to the attention of staff.
Yeah, Chair Harris, I appreciate you reminding me of that. We are, not to get too lengthy with this, but we're transitioning to a new agenda management software. And before we had it implemented, we were posting them manually, which was that first meeting we had. And I think I never posted the most recent one, assuming that the agenda management software captured it. It probably didn't. So I'll get that up as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. Okay, next item is the recommendations from the Library Task Force. I just want to say that I worked with staff on putting this together, and we wanted to keep it very concise and to be very clear on what our recommendations are. And we want to build on what already has been done by the county with the needs assessment that was performed 2 years ago. Also wanted to mention that I met with the library staff here in La Mesa a couple weeks ago, and they provided a lot of insight about the space needs. It pretty much echoed what's already in the needs assessment, but it was helpful to hear firsthand from them some of the problems they have in being able to do all the programs and activities that libraries typically do. And it's now that we're coming out of the pandemic, it's even, becoming more and more difficult for the library staff to meet all the needs of the community in the space that they currently have. And we all know that, but they got very specific about the different areas of the library and the issues that are there. So anyway, I met with the library staff because I thought it would be helpful when I met with Carlo and Lynn to go over these recommendations to have some better insight. So
And you
why don't
can-
we go?
Can you elaborate as to what I'd be interested in finding out what specifically they told you as far as their needs. I'd like to know what they told you, if you can elaborate a little bit more on it.
Yeah, in fact, I took pretty good notes, and I'm in the process of typing them up, and I'll share that with all the committee members. But they told me about a number of activities that that have been held at the library where they were over capacity. It's mostly related to children and teen programs, which can be quite popular. They also, not having an outdoor space that they can really hold events has been a real limitation. Then the technology area with the computers, the printer, the 3D printer and the copy printers, those get heavy use, and they clearly are in need of expanding that to truly serve everyone who's coming into the library. a couple other things. I talked to them about the needs assessment, and they identified a couple gaps in the needs assessment. These aren't major gaps, but there were some limitations to the county's need assessment. One is that it mostly received input from library users who came into the library because they had a chance to post comments on the board. But those who don't come into the library but are using the library services online, they weren't really included in the needs assessment. And then also Spanish-speaking library users, they said there were limitations with the needs assessment there. I just wanted to maybe turn to task force member Moore, and these are not criticisms. They were just comments the staff made about what more we can do if we get this consultant on board.
I'm not surprised by anything I'm hearing.
Okay. But
Yeah,
in the interest of time, I'll put all the comments, I'll send out all of their insights and comments as I interpreted them to all the board members within the next week, so that we can all share that.
Thank you.
Yes, Vice Chair Schmitz.
And I'd like to kind of point out that the staff that you've spoken to, that you spoke to recently, a lot of them are fairly new. I mean, you've got a teen program person that's been there for years, but the head librarian for our branch is temporary. She barely found out where the bathrooms are before her supervisor was promoted, and so she's now the acting head librarian. So she's normally the children's librarian, and because of the pandemic, she really hasn't been able to do any children's programming. So, I mean, if we had staff that had been with our branch for several years pre-pandemic, I'm sure they would have echoed a lot of what you heard, but they might have even been able to elaborate even more. So.
there are plenty of old hands there, though.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'm sure task force member Harris met a few of them.
Yeah, if she talked to Safa and Denise, then
Right.
we're in good shape.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, well, let's take a look at the 3 recommendations that are contained in this draft. And it is draft, so still open to the input of all the members of our task force, as well as any members of the public. And speaking of that, do we have any public comments? Is there anyone on this call?
We do not have any public comments on this item.
Okay.
And Chair,
Great.
I'm going to screen share the document just to facilitate discussion for the group.
Okay. Okay, so looking at the first recommendation to retain a qualified consultant to prepare a library needs assessment and feasibility study. There's 3 subsections here, and which you can see, and wanted to see if you have any comments on the wording, or whether this captures the scope of work that we'd like the consultant to do. And please raise your hand, or your virtual hand, or your actual hand, if you have any comments. Okay, Member Wilcox.
I just was curious about in 1B where we've identified Spanish-speaking residents. Could we say non-English speaking residents and make it more general, so that if there's Arabic or some other somebody who wants to be involved. I know it's difficult. We had that problem when I was a teacher. We had lots of kids who didn't speak English and not a lot of translators, but it just feels very narrow.
Thank you. That's a really good suggestion. Does anyone else have comments?
I have a question now. On
Yes.
paragraph 2.1, where it says developing, no, on 1, it says expanding the current library by constructing a second floor mezzanine and or exploring options to expand into a portion of the existing post office space. Why this portion and not the whole? Somebody knows something we don't know? Perhaps we can only talk about a portion.
I'll go ahead and answer that question. Task Force Member Navarro, the reason that that language is in there is because we have a pretty firm lease with the post office. I think, as I mentioned in our earlier meetings, it's a lease that has an initial 20-year term with 4 extensions at the tenant's option. So that would require further direction from City Council. Even this request here to talk about exploring the potential of using a portion of their space is something that would need to be highlighted for City Council, and then we would need to be directed to engage in that conversation with the post office as part of negotiations for the library space, for the post office space.
Any other comments on the first recommendation? Vice Chair Schmitz, did you have your hand up? You're muted, so I wasn't sure. You're still muted, so we can't hear what you're saying, John. There you go.
Okay. Would it be appropriate to say, just to cover Member Navarro's comment, instead of just a portion, could say a portion for all of the existing post office to cover all contingencies?
Yeah, I think we could. I think we could add that wording. Anyone else have comments?
I think that
Item
might
2.
be, Chair, I think that would be difficult to do
Oh,
because
okay.
that request would be tantamount to terminating a lease. And that's going to be a difficult thing to do.
Okay, so we don't want to, based on what you were saying, we don't want to premeditate.
We wouldn't want to get ahead of the City Council because, as I mentioned,
Okay.
the lease is at the tenant's option. The city does not have the option to terminate the lease. So in negotiating any kind of potential amendment, what this is saying is that the task force would recommend that the City Council request some kind of a modification of the lease that reduces the space. The way the lease is written today, it's entirely within the tenant's option, and changing the language or broadening it would basically suggest to terminate a lease that we can't terminate.
Okay,
We could probably request a change. I think that's enough, and see where the post office would like to take it from there.
okay. Yeah, what about adding words, options to modify the post office lease?
That, I believe, would be acceptable because then that language is broad. That could
Okay.
mean a number of things. I would want to make sure that you know, you're proposing something that's within the purview, and if expanding the language or broadening it, I think that would work.
Okay. Let's add that then. And a couple cleanup things on item 2 is that the 1 and 2 underneath should be A and B rather than 1 and 2. And in the third line, alternative needs another letter. It's misspelled.
There's a little bit of cleanup in 3 too, just in the second line, just some grammar
Okay.
cleanup. They'll say and direct staff to a retain. We'll clean that up as well. I just noticed that.
Okay,
Minor
Right, that-
grammar change.
that's why it says draft on these recommendations, because we're in the process of revising this. So when it goes to council, it will reflect exactly what the task force wants to see happen. So are there any further comments on section 2 regarding the 2 primary options for either expanding the existing library or working on constructing a new library in partnership with the County of San Diego?
Yeah, I have a comment. I think part of our discussion last meeting was also about potentially firming up the partnership, like making more clear what the partnership with the county and the city of La Mesa would be. I mean, is that worth sort of including in here as well? Because it's saying we're doing this in partnership with the county. I don't know. It's just a thought.
Maybe Susan can weigh in on that. My thoughts would be, it might be a little too soon for that, and it might be more beneficial to leave it broad, because we just don't know what that could shape into later. And you wouldn't, and this is just me talking, you wouldn't want to really pigeonhole yourself into specifics this early in the process. Maybe Carlo can weigh in on what he thinks on that. I don't know, but that would be my thought. I think it's beneficial to keep it broader.
Right. I would agree with that. I think you will want to know what options are going to move forward before you firm up that agreement.
Mhm.
But Carla may have a different idea about this.
I agree with the group. I feel like keeping it broad gives us options into the future. But it's a very good point. So I appreciate that question.
Well,
And
I suppose on the other, in keeping it even more broad, I mean, do we need to say in partnership with the County of San Diego at all? And just leaving it super broad, like we're gonna do this, you know?
I would say that you need a partner here. The county has been a very good partner in providing library operations. So I don't see the city doing any kind of project without the county's contributions and partnership. So they seem like the only likely partner, especially on the operations side.
Okay.
Yes, Vice Chair Schmitz.
Instead of just speaking specific or only speaking specifically to the county, who the city already has a well laid out agreement from 15, 20 years ago. Could we add the phrase in partnership with the county or other public agencies in case the feds or the state becomes a willing partner?
You can't, it won't hurt.
I think what we're really trying to get at is what Colin Parent was talking about at our last meeting, is that we have a new supervisor for La Mesa. And he appears to have some interest in the library and its operation. And really, truly, we want to emphasize what a great partnership that could be if the elected officials agree to work together, because I think the staffs already work well together in terms of operations. And so we're really talking about the partnership that would be at the elected official level, which is something we really want to nurture. That's what I gathered from Colin. So I kind of would like to leave it specific to the County of San Diego. Certainly in identifying sources of funding, if anything comes along through the state or federal government, that might then trigger expanding the partnership to other public agencies. That's my thought.
Chair, I would say that suggestion seems to be consistent with the approach in the intended approach in this section is the county has been our partner in library operations, and that would still be true. And to the vice chair's comment, expanding the language in the section below that talks about the potential sources of funding to include state and federal funds, I think would be an appropriate way to capture the idea that in requesting funding opportunities, we wouldn't be limited to just the county. I believe that's the intent. Yes? Okay.
Comment?
Yes, Mr. Navarro.
Yeah, I think, we all know that the county wants to be involved and helping the county library system to continue to grow. La Mesa is part of that since the county is involved in some funding of the operations. They do have a budget for that purpose, but they won't do anything until the city or the other non-city areas request it. And when you request it, you have to have some knowledge of what is it that you want in terms of size and detail. And the reason I say that is because there's two examples. One of them is Poway, modernization of their library, and the second one is Lakeside and their library. The county did nothing until the library system and some of the friends of the library started talking to the county about a new library. So, and finally it's being built as we speak. So we need to have some information. The county is willing to do that. There's no problem with that.
Thank you. Okay, and recommendation 3, are there any comments on this? It's really a next step, because once the assessment and feasibility study is completed, then it's really up to the city council to make the decision on which option to allocate funding and to direct staff to start the process of developing a library plan.
I don't have any problem with the language. I do have a question, though, that amongst our list of draft recommendations was one that near and dear to my heart, that I had suggested that we propose an amendment to the city's general plan. And I don't know if that is intended to be part of that section 3, or if we want to do a follow-up recommendation. But as a retired planner, I know the general plan is the adopted policy statement for the city, covering a range of public facilities and needs. And if we don't have language in ours now that expresses the needs of the city, if we take this study information and use that as the foundation for a general plan amendment to include it in the document, when do we want to make that recommendation, now or later?
Well, I'm wondering, Carlo, do you know when the next general plan update is going to get underway in La Mesa? I know it's every 10 years or so.
It's still a few years away. The process of amending the general plan is a little time intensive and cost intensive. If that's something that the council felt was needed to capture some direction or regarding the library, it's something the city council could add at a later time. Right now, as it stands, I think the scope of this task force is to recommend a course of action related to expanding library services. So that might fall just outside that scope. And that's something that staff could recommend as a procedural element, subject to future direction from the council based on their decision, as we have in item 3 here.
Or subject to the results of the needs assessment and feasibility study, what its outcome is, correct? It would seem that doing a general plan update now that's going to add to your timeline in my mind, right? And the results of the needs assessment might need to be factored into that.
Time out. An update is, if you're talking about a comprehensive update, yes, that's time consuming and cumbersome. But general plan amendments can be proposed up to 3 times a year. And
Right,
developers
John.
do it all the time. And so
the-
I'm just talking about an amendment to that particular section.
Yeah,
And-
I got you. But John, I think the way the community development department is handling amendments right now is as a efficiency item. They're packaging them together and taking them to council in bundles to make it more efficient. And I don't know, unless Carlo can correct me, I don't know when the timeline is for that bundle of amendments and general plan updates are going to go to council. They could go to council 2 years from now. It could be a year from now. I don't know that we know that. So that's the perspective I'm speaking from, is knowing that those amendments don't go to council one-off, they go as packages. Does that make sense?
You address that to Carlo?
Yeah, that's my understanding, unless Carlo knows more than me, which he very well may.
Yeah, that is our current situation, is that we only, as John, as you said, there's only a few opportunities per year to update the general plan for a general plan amendment. And we tend to hold those until we need them, to try to be as efficient as we can with our limited ability to amend the general plan. So that's really, Lynn is accurate in terms of what he's saying, and that would be the council's decision as to whether they feel like this change warrants a general plan amendment.
I'm guessing that if I walked in tomorrow to the city hall and filed an application for a general plan amendment on behalf of the Friends of the La Mesa Library, it would at least get us a placeholder in their work program. But I don't want to do that individually.
Well, certainly conducting the needs assessment and feasibility study doesn't require a general plan amendment, but clearly if things move forward, we would want to reassess that at some point. So I'm just thinking maybe for now, we don't include any recommendation regarding a GPA. And in the meantime, we can have some conversations with the community development director about timing. And I mean, we should actually take a look at the current general plan, because if it doesn't preclude the development of a new library, it seems to me that most cities have facilities elements in their general plan that allow the development of new and expanded facilities. So I'm talking here from ignorance, but because I haven't read the general plan. But I'm just
Well-
wondering if this is more of a procedural thing that we can kind of put off for now.
Well, I did. That's why I made those recommendations, is because when you read it, it basically says, here's what we have, here's how services are provided. But there isn't really word one in there about the adequacy of the level of service being provided. And if we do this study and come up with some really concrete evidence and recommendations for why the current situation is inadequate, there's, you know, if you read it, you'd think, oh yeah, there's a library here, that's fine. But we need it to say more than that. We need it to say, there's a library, it was inadequate, it's an interim situation, it's inadequate, here's why it's inadequate, and then include new goals or policies for the city to formally adopt. So when we move down the road to whether we're building a new one or expanding the existing one, it's clear to the community why the city council is doing it.
I agree with that. Gotta have a background section that explains why we're involved with this thing. What's going on? What's the problem? Well, here's a recommendation.
John, are there examples of that kind of language in other general plans maybe we could look at that get into that much detail about library facilities? Because in this particular instance, you know, if a general plan didn't mention a library at all, it would make more sense to me that this would be an immediate recommendation now, because it mentions no library in it. But if the study is going to, from a third party, non-biased consultant, determine that the needs aren't being met, then maybe this is something that comes later because it's been legitimized by that study. If we were to do that now, before the study, is that a little bit of the cart before the horse before we've really formalized that the library isn't meeting the need of the community?
Yeah, I'm not suggesting we need to push forward with a general plan amendment now.
Okay,
This is definitely a subsequent action
okay,
after the study, when we have the information clearly articulated. And because one of the things we hope to get out of this is, do we build a new library or do we try and retrofit or expand the existing one?
Mhm.
right.
But what I'm suggesting is the general plan needs to clearly articulate that although we have a library now, it really isn't adequate for a community our size. And as to what other general plans say, that's a master's study, I guess.
Yeah, I tried to be a planner in my life. I never ended up being one, but I did go to school to be one. I've never seen it codified in a general plan in that manner before. So I was just curious if there's any examples out there that go into that much detail about lack of adequacy of a facility. I just didn't know if it exists or not. It's possible it's out there. I just haven't seen it that way before.
And it would seem to be, you know, as you just articulated, John, potentially a subsequent action to the needs and feasibility assessment. Because as we talked about in our previous meetings, the purpose of this exercise and this series of recommendations is to have the city council authorize and approve an allocation for funding that allows the study to occur in order to provide the information needed to make a real assessment of needs, and then also to evaluate these options based on their relative merits and cost, and then have the city council take action on what type of potential capital project they wish to see move forward. And as a result of the study, that's something that could be cleaned up in a general plan amendment.
And also, as a result of the study, you would have something to talk to the county about before even you get to the master plan.
Okay. Any other comments regarding?
I just want to say I really like what you came up with, and thank you for taking the lead with that.
Yeah, David
I
worked very
second
hard
that.
on this, by the way. He's not going to say it, but David did work very hard on this. He brought staff a very good draft for us to review with him, and
Yeah.
he's put a lot of time in this. So I just want to say I appreciate his efforts and the efforts of this task force to get to this point. This is a good document.
Yeah, it looks good. I
Thanks.
don't-
Yeah, well done.
Thank you. Okay, well, then, would somebody like to make a motion that we approve these draft recommendations with the changes we discussed to item 1B, to add a change that would include non-English speaking residents, and a change to item 2A, which would be to wording to modify the lease as we discussed. I think those were the two main changes we made.
I so move.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Okay, so Vice Chair Schmitz made the motion. Task Force Member Navarro seconded. Could we have a roll call?
Yes, Chair Harris,
Yes, I vote yes.
Vice Chair Schmitz,
Yes.
Task Force Member Duggan,
Yes,
Task Force Member Chenoweth Moyer,
Yes,
Task Force Member Moore,
Yes,
Task Force Member Navarro,
Yes,
and Task Force Member Wilcox.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. All members in approve. Yay. Okay, so
Could I jump in for a second? Carlo, maybe you have is now a good time to talk about when we take this to council? I know we've talked about timing this with the mid-biennium and for the funding request. Are we too soon to be thinking about March? I thought we talked about March unless I was mistaken. Getting this on the agenda, getting a presentation together. Is that what we're still looking at, or am I getting ahead of myself?
No, Lynn, I think that's a good question. That was going to be my next question so what we have at this juncture is the task force has reviewed these draft recommendations, offered edits and suggestions to that document, which will be updated. And so my question to the chair would be, are you prepared to make a presentation at the first or the second meeting in March to the city council for further direction?
anyone want to chime in? Oh, Task Force Member Chenoweth Moyer.
wasn't he asking you?
Oh, I just, yeah, I think it would be very timely to get this to the council as soon as possible, and March would be ideal. Either meeting in March. I would be prepared to make a presentation on behalf of the committee, and would invite Vice Chair Schmitz to assist or co-present at whichever meeting we have.
Okay, very good. So what we'll do is we will look at our next two agendas, the ones in March, and we will just decide on a date based on what we have going on with the city council agenda and let you know. We would ask that you please update that document. We'll put together a very short agenda report just to let the council know what the task force has done to date and just describe narratively some of these recommendations and then seek the council's guidance and direction on the next steps.
Question,
Yes.
do we envision any Brown Act issues with the chair and I getting together to head scratch a presentation?
Not unless those discussions were going to lead to a vote of some kind. So I would say no.
Okay,
I would say you're free to do that. And then
wanted it
just
on the record.
absolutely no. Thank you for asking that question. Our city attorney would be happy that you asked that question. And then in terms of the task force itself, once the presentation is provided to city council and there are direction from the city council, the mission of the task force as prescribed by the council would be complete at that point, because you provided a course of action and next steps. However, pending further city council direction, we would ask if you are available to do so, to continue to participate in the process, specifically the community engagement portion. We think you guys would bring a lot of value to that discussion and help the community understand what the purposes of the needs and feasibility study is, and then gather additional input that hasn't yet been reflected as part of this process.
I was going to ask that once we've sent that on to the city council, hasn't our job been fulfilled? And we would probably always be available, that if some amendments or something comes up with the lease, that I think rather than having a meeting each month, that we just go along with when opportunities come up, that we then have a meeting rather than having one each month. Am I assuming that correctly?
Yes. Yes, you are.
Yeah, and staff would make sure to invite you at any important critical step in that process. Of course, we've got to get council direction for the study, but we would want you to continue to be involved in that process, and we would invite you to continue to participate.
Were we going to be involved in reviewing or selecting the consultant for the study?
Typically, that is a staff process. Once we have direction to prepare, let's say an RFP in this case, we have a selection process that goes through our purchasing officer. And so the city would make that selection depending on the size of the contract. It may or may not have to go to city council, but that would be a city decision at that point.
Right, I would think that once that consultant is selected, that consultant may want to meet with the individuals within the task force just to get background information. So yeah, we would be available for that.
One
In
thing
fact,
we
I
could,
would want to make sure that they do that. That they at a minimum interview with you one-on-one to get your needs and assessments out there, so that they have that perspective. That's what I mean when I say part of the community engagement process. I think you guys have all provided really valuable thoughts and insights, which is why we have this document now in front of us. And the consultant would be expected to talk to you and get your individual perspectives.
yeah, and just to piggyback on what Carlos is saying, one of the things the consultant's likely going to be tasked to do is to visit for some of these libraries in our region. And that site visit would be something that you folks could attend with the consultant as part of that community engagement process and function. So there's a big role to fill there if you folks are interested in that aspect of the consultant's process when they're hired.
Thank you.
Can I clarify? So we go to council, council accepts our report, makes a budget adjustment. Would we be dissolved, or would we just be in hiatus?
So your group as a Brown Act task force, that work would conclude, and you would roll into a voluntary community advisory role if that's something that you all want to do. But when those recommendations go to council, the mission of the task force as described by the council would in effect be complete, because the task force is always intended to have a very specific question and a specific answer to that question in a short amount of time. And so that work would be completed, but what we're asking you is if you'd be willing to participate with this project in another capacity moving forward.
Okay.
Good clarification. Okay, last item on our agenda is member announcements. And you can use this to say anything you want. Yes.
Nope. I don't know if everybody read
Robert.
that, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
the new library that's being put up in Pacific Highlands Ranch. Everybody see that in the newspaper?
Mhm.
No,
It's
I
a
haven't seen.
18,000 square foot new library. Price tag of $26 million. So if we started going down the road of thinking that we'll get a new library in the future, which could take 5 to 10 years, we might be talking about an 18,000 square feet, which we would almost have at that, our present facility. If something should happen to the post office, could go into the $50 million. And I don't think our taxpayers of the city of La Mesa would be thinking that that's the best use of their money when they've got, it's just like everybody goes to Starbucks, they have their favorite Starbucks, they go there, they're used to it. People always go to the library there in La Mesa and they're used to going there. So I think we really need to look at going down the road of, I don't know how much, what Carlos, just curious, with the options of the post office, when is their sunset lease up? What year, do you know?
I believe that year is 2042 for that lease to be fully sunsetted. But the suggestion is made in the recommendations is to work with the post office as part of a negotiation process. There's a renewal coming up, right?
Right.
So there's an initial 20-year term, and then there are 4 5-year terms at the tenant's option. We're in the period of time now where we can go to the post office and ask, but the ultimate lease is expiring in 20 years.
But again, I think we have to take into consideration, God knows what the postal service is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years with all the communications that we have now. I mean, they're operating in the red now, and it may become a point where mail will be obsolete. So anyway, that was my input about the new library, which they're building at $1,500 per square foot. I could build a pretty nice house for $1,500 a square foot. So anyway, that was my comment on these new construction projects.
Mhm.
And that's why you need the county to be a partner.
Are there any other member announcements or comments? Yes, Vice Chair Schmitz.
In a manner of tooting our own horn, I'm speaking now on behalf of the Friends of the La Mesa Library. We are in the final stages of entering into an agreement to purchase 2 new computer terminals for the children's section. The Friends will be paying close to $8,000 to put in. That there used to be 2 small terminals in the children's area, but they achieved the end of their useful life, and they were removed early in the pandemic, and the librarians asked if the Friends would help them replace them. So we are hopefully by summer, when the summer reading programs start in the library, you'll have these 2 new terminals over in the children's section, and compliments of the Friends of the La Mesa Library.
Wonderful.
That's another group you need to have on your side.
Good job, John.
Okay, I think we should wrap up the meeting now, unless there's any further comments. I want to thank everyone here for serving on this committee. It's really been productive, and it was You know, to get the ball rolling on the library is really going to be important, and you all are part of that effort. So let's keep working together moving forward. Anyone
agree.
else?
So
Is this the fastest like task force on record?
It's not. They're usually short. But I agree. I want to echo the thoughts of the chair. I think everyone here has contributed really strongly. We really appreciate all the recommendations. That product that the chair shared is really a summary of all the recommendations that you've all provided. So it made it really easy for Lynn and I to do our job. So we appreciate that. And now it's going to be up to the chair and the vice chair to close the deal with the council. So we'll help you out with that as well.
that was going to be my comment is, so Carla, you're going to let us know what the council agenda schedule looks like. Once we know that, you'll communicate with Chair Harris and I so we can arrange.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, and you'll let us know as well, because I know I'd like to attend that as a like a whatever spectator.
Yeah, we'll continue to stay in contact with the full task force with any kind of news like that. We'll make sure we get it out to you folks.
Okay,
And with that, I think we can adjourn the meeting.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good
okay,
day.
thank you.
You guys.